Nobody was ready for what came out of that room. Not the reporters. Not the fans watching from home. Not even the people inside the Dodgers organization who thought they already knew the full story. Because when a team holds an emergency meeting behind closed doors, the version that reaches the public is almost never the complete one. Pieces get managed. Edges get softened. The official statement arrives pre-shaped, already smoothed into something that protects everyone it needs to protect. That is what everyone expected on Thursday morning. That is not what they got. It started the night before, when the injury happened. The immediate story was about the collision. 3 Pirates players. The umpire's review. The confiscated uniforms. The medical team surrounding Ohtani on the grass at PNC Park while 38,000 people held their breath in collective, involuntary silence. That was the story everyone saw. What no one saw was what happened on the Dodgers bench in the 7th inning. What no one saw was what Ohtani said. And what no one fully understood, until Thursday, was that the injury to Ohtani's right knee was not simply a consequence of the collision. It was the consequence of something that had been building for longer than one night. Something the Dodgers medical staff had been monitoring. Something the GM had known about. Something Roberts had been navigating for weeks without saying so publicly. The full truth, when it finally arrived, landed differently than anyone expected. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. It started at 10:17. Those 17 minutes told their own story. People who cover this team closely noted that it was not the standard delay of logistics and preparation. It felt more like the delay of a room full of people making final decisions about how much to say. When Roberts walked in, he did not look like a man who had slept. He sat down. Adjusted the microphone. Looked briefly at the table in front of him before looking up at the assembled reporters. And then, before a single question was asked, he started talking. "I want to get ahead of some things," he said. "Because I think you deserve more than a managed answer today." The room shifted. Reporters who had been preparing their opening questions put their notepads down slightly. When a manager starts a press conference by telling you he's going to give you more than a managed answer, you stop preparing questions and start listening. "Shohei's knee," Roberts said. "What happened last night was real. It was dangerous. And I'm angry about it. I want to be honest about that." He paused. "But I also need to be honest about something else. The knee was not in perfect condition before last night." The room went very quiet. "He has been managing some discomfort in that joint for a number of weeks. Our medical team has been on top of it. We have been monitoring it extremely closely. And in our collective judgment, the training staff, our physicians, the front office, and Shohei himself, the decision was made to continue, with careful management, because the discomfort had not reached a threshold that required him to stop." He paused again. Put both hands flat on the table. Last night's collision changed the calculus. What was a managed condition became an acute situation. And that is what we are now dealing with. Nobody moved for a moment after he finished that sentence. It was not just the information. It was the directness of it. The absence of the careful, lawyered language that organizations typically reach for when the news is complicated. Roberts had walked into the room and said the thing that is hardest to say: "We knew something, we made a decision, and the situation has changed." A reporter asked the question that was already in every person's mind: how long had Ohtani been managing this? Roberts didn't hesitate. "Approximately 5 weeks. Another pause in the room. "Longer this time." 5 weeks. That means the knee condition predates the last 2 series. It predates the 3-game stretch where Ohtani posted an ERA that had seemed physically impossible for a man also hitting home runs at his pace. It predates, by almost a month, the moment everyone in baseball was talking about how Ohtani looked better than he ever had. He had been doing all of that on a compromised knee. The reporter who had asked the question wrote something down. Then looked back up. And he wanted to keep going? Roberts almost smiled. It didn't quite arrive. But it was close. That is the most Shohei answer you could get, he said. Yes. He wanted to keep going. The GM spoke next. Shorter. More measured. But no less direct. He explained that the organizational decision to continue had not been made lightly. That there had been multiple consultations. That the protocols followed were the same protocols the Dodgers apply to any player managing a significant physical condition during an active season. That Ohtani had been fully informed and fully involved in every decision. He is not the kind of player who needs to be protected from information about his own body, the GM said. He is exactly the opposite of that. He wanted to understand everything. The risk model. The recovery projections. The thresholds we were watching. He absorbed all of it, and then he made a decision as a professional athlete and as a partner in his own health management. He leaned forward slightly. And I want to be clear, the decision to continue was not reckless. It was considered. What happened last night was not the outcome of that decision. What happened last night was the outcome of a dangerous, avoidable play that should not have occurred. He sat back. Those are two separate things. I don't want them collapsed into one narrative. Mark Prior had not been expected to speak. He had entered the room quietly, slightly behind the GM, and sat at the far end of the table. Most of the reporters assumed he was there for context, for support, the kind of organizational presence at a difficult press conference that doesn't typically generate its own questions. They were wrong. A reporter, toward the end of the session, directed a question at Prior. Not about strategy. Not about pitch counts or mechanics. About the seventh inning. About what Ohtani had said on the bench after he came off the field. Prior was quiet for a moment. He looked at Roberts. Roberts gave the smallest, barely perceptible nod. Prior turned back to the reporter. He came and sat down, Prior said. His voice was low. The voice of someone choosing words not because they are difficult to find, but because they matter too much to rush. He was in pain. You could see it. He wasn't hiding it from us, not in that moment. And he sat down next to me and he said something that I've been thinking about ever since. The room had stopped making any noise at all. He said, Prior paused. Exhaled. He said, I'm not finished yet. Tell me what I need to do to get back out there. A few seconds passed. That was the seventh inning, Prior continued. He was sitting on that bench with a knee that we now know was acutely injured. He had come off the field. The game was still being played. And his first thought, his immediate, unguarded, first thought, was about getting back out there. Prior stopped. Looked at the table for a moment. I told him to stay put. I told him the team had it. I told him, he paused. I told him we needed him for bigger games than this one. He said the last sentence quietly. Almost to himself. He didn't like that answer, Prior added. But he stayed put. The emergency meeting had happened the night before. After the medical team had completed their initial assessment. After the game had ended. After the reporters had filed their first edition stories and the social media posts had already begun to spiral into speculation and fear. The meeting was called by Roberts. Attended by the full roster. Held in the visitors' clubhouse at PNC Park, which is not a large room, and which by all accounts was very full. Roberts did not give a speech, exactly. Multiple players, speaking anonymously to reporters on Friday morning, described it less as a speech and more as a clearing of air. Roberts told them what he knew. He told them what he didn't know yet. He told them what the medical team had said in the initial assessment and what questions were still unanswered pending further imaging. And then he said something that multiple people in that room independently chose to repeat to reporters, in slightly different words, but with the same essential shape. He told them that Ohtani would not want the team to shrink. He told them that everything Ohtani had done this season, the 5 weeks of playing through discomfort, the home runs, the innings, the double duty that made grown managers describe it as unfair at press conferences, had been done in service of winning. That the way to honor that was not to play with hesitation or grief, but to play with the same intentionality that had made Ohtani impossible to look away from. He told them, this is not the end of his season. And even if the timeline turns out to be difficult, this is not the end of his story. One player, afterward, described the room as completely silent when Roberts finished. Not the silence of shock. The silence of people absorbing something that has settled into them correctly. By mid-morning on Thursday, the Dodgers fan base had fractured into roughly 3 emotional positions. The first, fear. Acute, familiar, sports-flavored fear, the kind that arrives when the player your team has built its identity around suddenly becomes fragile in a way that cannot be argued away by highlight reels. The second, anger. Directed at the Pirates players involved in the collision. Directed, in some quarters, at the organization for not disclosing the pre-existing condition sooner. Directed at the general unfairness of a situation that felt entirely preventable. The third, and perhaps the most surprising, something that did not have a clean name. Not exactly awe. Not exactly sadness. The feeling that arrives when you learn that the extraordinary thing you have been watching was even more extraordinary than you knew. That the home runs and the innings and the mound visits and the double play outs had all been happening against a backdrop that the public was not aware of. That Ohtani had been carrying something extra, something physical, something private, and had chosen not to let it define the version of himself the world was seeing. When that information reached fans on Thursday morning, a significant portion of them went quiet in a way that social media, usually incapable of quiet, actually reflected. Not the absence of posts. Something more specific, the presence of posts that didn't know quite what to say. That, in its own way, told you everything. The imaging results were expected by Friday afternoon. Roberts said he would address the media again once those results were available and had been reviewed by the full medical team. He said it directly, without elaboration, at the end of Thursday's press conference. Then he stood up. Straightened his jacket. Looked at the assembled reporters for a moment. He told Pryor he wasn't finished, Roberts said. Not as a closer. Not as a prepared line. More like a man thinking out loud about something he had been turning over since the night before. 7-inning. Acute injury. Bench. First thought. He shook his head slightly. First thought was getting back out there. He picked up his folder from the table. That's who he is, he said. That doesn't change because of a diagnosis. That doesn't change because of a timeline. That is who Shohei Ohtani is. He walked out of the room. Nobody followed immediately. For a few seconds, the reporters just sat with it, that last sentence, delivered without drama, hanging in the air of a conference room in Los Angeles like something that needed a moment before it could be properly absorbed. There are things in baseball that a press conference can explain. And there are things that a press conference can only confirm. Thursday morning confirmed something that most people watching this season had already suspected, had felt, more than understood, every time Ohtani walked to the plate or stepped to the mound or sat down on a bench and told his pitching coach he wasn't finished yet. The numbers were always going to be extraordinary. That was already established. What Thursday revealed was the weight behind them. And that weight, once known, made everything that came before it look different. Not smaller. Larger. The way a light source looks brighter when you finally understand how far it had to travel to reach you.